the MoneyMagpie Invest podcast. I'm Jasmine Birtles, founder of MoneyMagpie.com, and today I'm joined by the Economist Catherine McBride, who writes for Briefings for Britain and also has her own Substack. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Jasmine.
So great to have you here because I have a lot of questions for you because I know that you have been pro Brexit for some years. You've argued for it. You have a lot of figures for why you think Brexit would be a good idea, and you're thinking now that Brexit still is a good idea. We've had a few surveys out that have said some rather interesting things. One saying that it's about 70% of people would go back into the EU, another saying absolutely the opposite. What have you unpicked from these surveys?
Well, I think that all surveys allow you to get the answer you want if you ask the question correctly. And I'm sure the people who did the first survey saying people wanted to go back in did ask the question in such a manner that people were likely to say yes. However, most people I talk to really don't understand what the EU does and what it was doing for the UK. And there are problems with the UK government, and I think some of that was because for years and years we let the EU do things and we lost that ability in government to do them for ourselves. But there's a lot of other issues. If you look at the second survey, they didn't ask people about rejoining the EU. They asked people, do you think the UK government should make all the decisions on X? And they asked about 20 different things. And all of those things were things that the EU used to do. They used to make those decisions, and now we can make them ourselves. And interestingly enough, the majority of people in every case wanted the UK government to make those decisions. So whether it was food standards or our immigration laws or everything that they went through, people want the UK government to make those decisions. And weirdly, very few people chose the option that some international body should make the decisions. In most cases, less than 10% of people wanted that. So what becomes obvious is if you ask people, do you want to join the EU, they might have a gut reaction of yes, of course, because they're thinking everything was nicer back in 2015. So if we rejoin the EU, we'll go back to 2015 and everything will be happy. But in reality, they all want, and whether you're on the left or the right, they all want the government to do things here, which they couldn't do if they were part of the EU. So there are people on the left who want the government to renationalize the railways or, take over the steel mills. And you can't do any of that in the EU. And there'll be people on the right who want the government to stop all the immigration and send everyone home. And you couldn't do that in the EU. So it is one of those things where we need our government to stand up and take control.
And what about when it comes to the economics, though? You are an economist. I certainly have a number of friends who are small businesses, and they say they've given up or it's been much harder now that they're outside of the EU. It's been more costly, lots more red tape. And do you feel that they are the minority? Is there actually has there been a genuine economic uplift to us for being outside of the EU?
Well, there's for a lot of things, for the big economic situation, trade didn't change very much. I'm a trade economist. That's what I do. I was on a government commission looking into the trade agreements we've made with Australia and New Zealand and the CPTPP. And I can tell you our big picture trade, because it's done by large multinationals, they export all around the world. They've always exported all around the world, and they know exactly how to do that. And now, besides filling in forms to send things to America or Australia or China, they now fill in the same forms to send things to Europe. So for them, they didn't even blink. And they do bring in the bulk of our trade income. Obviously, also big picture, we now don't pay the EU money to be a member because trading with the EU was never free. And this is something that most SMEs don't understand. For them, it was free. So they used to be able to just sometimes not fill in any forms and drive goods across the channel on the train, and no one even knew they were doing that. So for them, it was completely form free and tariff free. But if they actually read the rules of the EU, they were probably meant to fill in forms.
And
Uh,
you're mentioning tariffs there, which is, of course, a very interesting subject at the moment. I mean, I was quite impressed that our American tariffs imposed on us by the USA are lower than the ones imposed on Europe. So that in itself seems to justify being separated from the EU. Do you feel that way about the tariffs?
well, definitely, we did a very good deal with the US. It wasn't as big a deal as Europe has done, but it was a very important deal because our two main exports to the US are cars and aircraft parts and engines. And both of those will go in. The cars still have 10% tariffs on them, but the aircraft parts and engines will be tariff free. And one of our biggest imports from the US, well, our biggest import is oil and natural gas right now, but they were always coming in tariff free. But we used to bring in ethanol, which we put into petrol, and we were putting 24% tariffs on that, which is crazy. That's us hurting ourselves because it was compulsory now to put ethanol into petrol. And if you fill up in a petrol station, you get a choice between 5% or 10%. There isn't a no percent, so you've got to put it in. So as it's a compulsory additive, it seems crazy to me that the government would then add a tax on it coming into the country. Because then on top of that, as you know, there's 52 pence of fuel duty added on to the petrol. And then on top of that, as you will know, there's VAT at 5%, which is calculated on the total amount. So you think they're adding VAT onto the petrol duty and the ethanol tariff. So it's about half of what you pay for your petrol is taxes in one shape or the other.
Which is shocking,
It
for
is
the
shocking.
economy generally. And I'm guessing that we've now brought that down, or we're going to bring that down, are we? Or is it staying at 24%?
Well, no, the 24% will go zero. So we're taking that off completely. There is one company in the UK that used to make ethanol that is getting very upset and demanding that the government pay them money because they're going to go out of business if they have to compete with the US. But I do not feel sorry for them at all because A, they're making ethanol from wheat, and wheat is not a good product for making ethanol. Ethanol is basically an alcohol that comes from sugar. There's a lot more sugar in corn, which is what they use in the US. So you can use a smaller amount of land to make the same amount of ethanol as you would use in the UK if we'd have to use a lot more land growing wheat to make it to use it to make ethanol, which is crazy. You know, we should be eating wheat.
So with tariffs, you're saying that there are now no tariffs between Britain and the EU.
Yeah,
But what a lot of people are saying is that we have obviously our economy is in a right state, frankly, let's put
yeah,
it in
yeah,
those terms.
yeah,
And if we were in with the EU, it would be in a better state. Forgetting it seems to me that places like Germany, France, and frankly most of the EU, or most of the countries are having a problem. Is that your feeling? What do you feel about the idea that we are in a mess economically? Whose fault is it, do you think?
Oh, it is most definitely it's really the fault of COVID, and COVID happened in all the Western world. And anyone who closed their economy down for COVID and printed a lot of money is in a major hole right now. And any country that's really bought into the green agenda is in a major hole as well. And that is all the big economies in Europe. I had to write a paper last year with a Spanish economist, and he was writing about Spain, and I was writing about the UK. And what amazed me is the economic figures he was talking about over from 2020, 21, 22. looked exactly like the UK's, except he was blaming it directly on COVID. No other chance, nothing else was in his mind, but this was COVID. And if you showed the same figures to the UK, they all think it was Brexit. We have a economic group, whether it's the OBR or the people in Westminster or most of the think tanks, who are so blinkered by their hatred of Brexit that they blamed, and they still blame. The Financial Times will still write articles blaming everything on Brexit, as if nothing else has happened to the UK since 2016. And when you say that our major problems were A, printing a lot of money and closing the economy was disastrous. It was crazy because we now know that, and we knew at the time, quite frankly, people under the age of 65 were not at any real risk. And that's our retirement age. So that the working population could have continued working. And the people who were at risk could have been sheltered in some way. But, a lot of the very old people are already in homes or places where they could be very easily protected. And instead, we didn't protect them well enough and we wrecked the economy.
Mm.
But the other big thing that is very noticeable in all our figures is this crazy idea, which is both parties, both the Conservatives and then the Labour Party, put humongous tariffs onto our oil and gas industry, not tariffs, taxes. So the Conservatives thought that it would be a smart idea in a crisis when the Russian gas is being sanctioned, the gas price has gone through the roof, and they thought that was a good time to tax the gas and oil companies. When you go, no, if you need more of something, you lower the taxes. You don't need to be a financial genius to work that out. In fact, you could even have given them a tax credit if they pumped out more oil and gas. For every extra litre they push out there, you could make it tax-free. But instead of that, we had this brainwave idea that as a windfall for 5 years, we would put the taxes at 75%. The Labour Party came in and they extended it to 78%. And they extended it out to 2030. So the windfall is going to last even longer. And all that's happened is rather than them be a windfall, is our production of oil and gas has plummeted from the 50 millions to the 30 millions. I mean, it's really short. It's straight down. No one is interested in developing that industry in the UK anymore. And this was a really big export for us. This was a big source of export revenue, but now we have to import oil and gas. That's the stupid thing. It's not like we're living without oil and gas. We haven't all gone green. We don't all drive an electric car, and we still rely on gas to produce our electricity.
It's a mess, as you say.
Mm.
That a number of different people are saying over and over, we are in a mess. We're not the only ones, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
All the Western nations that did the
yeah.
stupid lockdown, that are going for net zero, they are all having economic problems. Certainly across Europe, definitely, any of the Western countries. But the question is now for the UK, is the UK a good place to invest? Because this government is wanting pension companies to invest in British companies. You can see their reasoning. They're wanting to get us investing. Good idea, I think, but they're particularly wanting us to invest in Britain. Is this genuinely a good thing for the individual investor?
Well, I think it depends on your age. If you're a young person just starting out working and you've got some money to put away, and I would recommend to everyone to do that, then it does make sense to go into equity markets and to hopefully find something that is going to either give you, a lot of growth going forward or you take a risk. And if you're an old person, and you can find something that pays dividends, and a lot of shares don't really anymore, then that's a good investment as well because you'll get an income from it. And pretty much every other way of getting an income seems to be closed down by the government at the moment. So a lot of people were investing in property and they were renting it out, and that gave them a great income. But now there's a lot of changes to the rental laws. So I think people will be moving into trying to find some kind of equity that gives them a decent dividend payment. But equities are more risky. That's the natural thing, and people have to accept that. And I'm always worried when a government decides to make it compulsory for a percentage of a pension fund to go into equity markets. You sort of think, well, the idea of a pension fund manager, he should be the one making that decision and going, well, I think the market's really cheap at the moment. I think we should buy it, and we'll go in on the index or something. But then you've got this other problem where our index is very heavily leaning towards people involved in the oil and gas industry, not just Shell and BP, who are big parts of the market, but also a lot of companies that are either providing them with infrastructure or refineries and things like that. And they, as I say, from a stroke of a pen, a government decision, we're closing down that industry. Two big oil refineries have gone, well, one closed, Grangemouth, and the other one, the Lindsay one, has gone into administration. So that is the real trick with investing in the UK at the moment, is to pick an industry that our government, either side, is not going to suddenly start taxing out of existence. Right now, our service industries are doing really well. And if you look at our big service exports, they are the big consulting companies, financial services, and also insurance services. But those can also move out of the country pretty quickly. And if the government keeps raising corporate taxes or making their life difficult, there's no reason why they can't start booking more trades in their New York office. Because the real way out of the Western world's demise, is you look at the US. They are lowering their corporate taxes and they're increasing their power and they're encouraging people to pump out more oil and gas. And they've understood that the new service industries, AI, require a huge amount of energy, and they're going to make energy as cheap as possible. And you look at what we're doing here, and it's the exact opposite. Making energy expensive, we're discouraging oil and gas, and we're putting up corporate taxes.
It sounds to me that you're more pro. Let's talk about index tracking funds, sort of easy investment. If you had a choice between the FTSE 100 and the S&P 500, it sounds to me you'd go for the S&P 500 rather than the British version.
I probably would at the moment, but it's, as I said, it can change quite rapidly. The problem with the S&P 500 is it's very heavily geared to what they call the Magnificent Seven. And they have had a fantastic run, but there is a point where you think there will be a new thing. Something will change. Now, if they're clever, because back in the dark ages when I started doing this in the 80s, Microsoft was a new thing. And that if you look at what was in, say, the Dow in those days, because the Dow is a very small index of just 30 top stocks, it's not cap stock index, it's actually price index. So it's not a great investment. But if you look at what was in it, there were virtually, I don't think there were any banks. There were still a lot of steel companies, aluminium companies, and there were certainly no AI companies or tech companies. And you see something like Microsoft appeared in the 90s, became very, very big, and it's still very big, and it's still be part of the Magnificent Seven. But a lot of the others, really appeared in the 2000s, and you think, well, do they have a governance and people in charge who are going to keep looking for the next big thing and keep looking for a way to keep that company at the top? I mean, Tesla's done some fantastic things and gone from cars to
rocket,
the amazing his internet system, Starlink, and also his rockets. I'm not sure that there is a lot of money in rockets because they're taking commercial payloads up and putting satellites and stuff into the sky. But that's the problem with the S&P 500, because I think if you stripped out those companies, you've got to look at all the rest, and are they making money? And should we be looking at what's the next best big thing? I do think the next big thing will happen in America because they're encouraging, people to be entrepreneurial.
whereas we're not in this country.
Not at all.
Yeah, this is my sense that at the moment there's a sort of pall over business, over society, over everything. We're having our feet manacled with taxation. Um, it seems everything's being done to push people out if they're wanting to do business. And yet the government is wanting us to invest in the FTSE 100 into Britain, British stocks. But you, even though they are supposedly cheap, you're feeling that it's not the sort of place that you'd put your money.
Well, you get to the other end of it where they're still charging people death duties at 40%. And so there will be a lot of people going, well, why should I save money at all? Why not just spend it, have a nice time? The government has to look at motivation. How do you motivate people to put money into businesses, and even rather than invest in stocks and shares, getting people to start a business? A lot of small businesses should be going, well, hang on, I was going to leave this to my son or my daughter or whatever. And now the government's going to take 40%, so I'm not going to bother. And that's another issue we have, where we've really got to change our attitude that it's okay to make money if you're making a new business and you're employing people. The biggest people complaining about what's happening in the oil and gas sector are the trade unions. And it intrigues me that they seem to have no one representing them in Westminster anymore, even though we have a Labour government with a massive majority. And you think, well, who does listen to the trade unions if it's not the Labour government? So there are some problems with the British environment at the moment. And I agree with you. I would love to invest here, but I'm looking at it thinking, well, what will they not try and tax? What what where would I put money where they wouldn't try and take it off me? They don't understand that they've got to let money grow and you've got to invest and wait. You can't just people might be at my age downsizing, want to sell their house and get a smaller house. But then they do that, they'll have to pay stamp duty. So the government takes a big chunk of whatever they've got left. And then after they pay off whatever they owe on the house, which the government also doesn't seem to understand that most people who own a house also have a mortgage with it. Then if you put it into stocks and shares and it's successful, you'll get capital gains tax. If you don't sell it and you leave it to your children, they'll get taxed at 40% in capital gains, in death duties. So it's kind of a crazy environment to be investing. So I'm
So
not at all surprised that so many high net worth individuals and so many non-doms have just left. They've just
yeah,
gone,
it
forget it.
doesn't make sense. I mean, it does make sense, as you say. Anybody with serious money or even half serious money
Yeah,
is
just
looking at the UK and thinking, nah, thanks. So, finally, Catherine, what would you say the government, with whatever government we have, whatever government is here, should be doing? What should they be doing right now to kickstart the economy and get Britain moving again?
well, the first thing they have to do is stop spending. And that's the quickest way to get out of a debt hole. And most real people out there, your listeners will know that if you get into a debt hole, you must stop spending. And it's incredible that our government doesn't understand that. And a lot of their spending is on completely useless things. And it's not just the crazy stuff like sending £9 billion to the Chagos Islands, to Mauritius to take the Chagos Islands, or giving £11 billion to developing nations to put in green energy. But it's also the number of people in the public service who are not doing a real function. So we've got far too many managers in the public service. We should be cutting them back. We've still got DEI officers, and there are still people during working hours doing these courses to explain to them how to deal with DEI issues. It's like, no, that's a rich country's thing, and we are not a rich country anymore. We can't waste money on that stuff. As most companies in the UK are pulling back out of the ESG stuff, is they are realizing that was for boom times of the late 90s, early 2000s. It's no longer boom time. No company can waste money on that anymore. And the government has to take that same attitude. First, cut the silly spending, then look at the important spending. You know, they had an idea to cut welfare, but they seem to be cutting it in all the wrong places. And they've got to really stop the whole filling in forms and saying the Motability thing is outrageous. You know, you must make people turn up in person and show you why they're disabled and why they need a car, because the idea that you can just fill in a form and lie over the internet, and people on the internet will tell you how to lie, what to say, and you'll get sent a new BMW. And we're wondering why we have a debt crisis. The second thing I would do is actually cut the stupid taxes. There are a lot of taxes that are actually lowering investment and lowering production, and that is having a bigger loss to the government than the money the tax is raising. If you look at the amount we raise in this pitiful tax on the oil and gas industry, I know I've talked about it a lot, but if you look at that, the amount we're raising is going down because the amount of oil and gas we're producing is also going down. So here's a tax that is actually stopping an industry. Now, if the idea of this was to kill the industry, then you may say it's been successful. But if you were actually trying to raise revenue, it's been a disaster. You will also see that in our cigarette taxes. Our cigarette taxes have got so high, it's a complete Laffer curve. So the revenue being raised has dropped as the tax has gone up. It's now over £10 per packet on average is just tax. But what has increased instead is illegal cigarette sales. So one of the biggest things our police are wasting their time on is catching small shops in the East End of London or Manchester or wherever that are selling cigarettes under the counter that don't have any tax on them. And so you've kind of you've pushed the theoretical tax up, you've lowered the actual tax take, and you now have the cost of having policemen and probably customs officer policemen running around trying to arrest these people that are selling illegal cigarettes. So you've increased your expenses and lowered your revenue. And there's a lot of these. The other, the death duty one is another one. It just doesn't raise enough money to have all the rich people leave the country. It's less than 1% of all the taxes we raise. Stamp duty is another one. It's less than 1% of all the stuff we raise, but it stops people moving house. When I was young, people used to move house probably 5 times in their life as they went from first flat to slightly bigger flat to a house, family house, then on the way down the other way. Now that's stopped because stamp duty, the cost of moving is too expensive. But every time someone doesn't move house, they don't get new curtains, they don't get new kitchen equipment, they don't paint the place, they don't employ painters, they don't replant the garden, they don't do whatever they do when they get a new house. And that's a huge bonus to the economy. It's got a huge multiplier effect. One of the great industries of this country was real estate. And a lot of people hate real estate agents, or they're happy that their conveyancing solicitor is going broke or whatever. But it's a big business. And the moving trucks, the moving vans, everything about it, it's a huge boon to the economy. And yet we've put this ridiculous tax on that has actually slowed that down, and people have stopped moving as much. Because I actually am quite controversial here. Most people feel that our problem with housing is a lack of supply. And I will admit that there's a lot of immigration coming in and they all need to live somewhere, which is why we've put them up in hotels, because we don't have the houses. But there are also, I think, a lot of houses that people need to move out of. I do know a lot of people my age who are in houses that are too big for them, but they're not going to move because of stamp duty. And I know a lot of young people who want to have families. They're newly married, they may have had one child, they're still living in their 1-bedroom flat or their 2-bedroom flat. They'd love to buy a family house and they can afford the mortgage, but they can't afford the stamp duty. because the stamp duty is after tax income and it's a huge amount of money. It can be your entire annual income after tax. And the government doesn't realize that's stopping people moving because you can't borrow that off a bank against a house because you don't get it back when you sell the house, unlike the mortgage money. So there are some really stupid taxes, and they're my three favorite, but I can go on and on.
Well,
If
no,
you,
I think you're absolutely right, and it's something that I've been saying as well. Cut the taxes. We need taxation. The issue is which taxes work, which taxes do the least amount of harm. And I
yeah,
think you've itemized some of the ones that do a huge amount of harm and don't bring in anything like enough money.
yeah,
And this spending as well. And this is something that this government really needs to get their heads around. That they really can't spend themselves out of trouble. The more they spend, the more trouble they're going to create for themselves. And
yeah.
finally, Catherine,
Okay,
um,
that's all right.
in this, after all, everything that we've been saying, and I know you can't give advice, but what do you say to British investors in the economy that we're in? How should they think about their investments in the next 6 to 12 months? Because this is something you used to do when you were in the city. I know you would be talking to investors. How would you talk to your clients today if you had some?
Well, I think I would be telling everyone possible to hold on. Try, try and hold on to everything you've got and stay alive for another 5 years, and hope that we get a more sensible government next time round. And I am doing my very best to advise whoever will listen as to how they can change the tax system, and get more money and a bigger, better economy. But yeah, looking at it, it is tricky. There are lots of um, new ideas out there, and I really do like the sort of entrepreneurial idea. And there are some that I see and they come across my desk and I think, gee, that's a good idea. But they don't need a lot of money, and you do have to accept that a huge number of those companies go broke. It is a kind of a Woodford idea, it's you don't want to buy a lot because you will, if it's a small company, you'll be the one pushing up the price. But you can, a lot of things are not listing anymore. They're going to private equity. And so it is actually quite hard to invest in things in the market because we've kind of scared people away from listing in the London market. So a lot of new entrepreneurial ideas, and the British are brilliant at coming up with crazy ideas, but they will go and list in America if they're going to list at all. But in general, they're going to private equity. The private equity companies are really good at seeing who's out there.
So ideally, for the individual, we should be looking at America still, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really a terrible thing to say, but it does look like that. I mean, the London Stock Exchange has done some really crazy things. And I say this as a woman and a woman who could easily be on a board of any kind of company, but I am very much against the idea that 40% of the people on a listed company board have to be women, and there has to be at least one woman with a serious job, so the CFO or the CEO or something like that on the commission. And they also need some DEI person. And you sort of go, what? Why? Like, young entrepreneurs with a tech company, we know statistically they are more likely to be male. they and they're and that's because they played computer games since the age of 0 when their sisters were doing their homework, and that's why there are a lot of men on company boards. And the UK wants a large proportion of the money, the company, to be floated here. And in the US, you only need to sell about 100 shares, I think it is, and you can keep a lot more of the company. And you can also have two levels of shares. So you can have a voting share and an investing share, which enables an entrepreneur to keep hold of the company, where you can't do that in the UK. So there are a lot of differences. There are a lot of reasons why people are going to the US. It's not just about the fact that people value their goods more highly there. It is, a lot of it is to do with the fact that we've made the stock market rules really
Anti-growth.
unfriendly to
Yeah.
an entrepreneur, a young male entrepreneur with a tech company. He's not going to go, and
Mm.
the Magnificent Seven are a great case in point. I did write about this a couple of years ago because all of those companies were set up and run by men.
Mm.
One or two of them had female CFOs or CEOs eventually when they were listed and established companies. And those women got their jobs because they're really good at what they do. I know one of them, they did not get their job because they were ticking a DEI box.
Yeah. That's
Um, and they have been the biggest thing to invest in for the last 10 years. And they wouldn't have made it onto the London market because they didn't have 40% of the women on the board. It's like,
crazy.
what's
Crazy.
wrong with you? You think that the LSE has just lost their marbles. You think, God, the whole world is trying to invest in these companies, and you would not have let them list because you've got stupid rules.
Well, thank you, Catherine. That's it. We could go on about all sorts of other
We
things.
could, we could. We must
Yes.
have coffee one day, sit down and
Yes.
have a good chat. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. That was Catherine McBride, economist and economics writer. This has been the Money Magpie Invest podcast. Remember, nothing that has been said in this podcast should be taken as financial advice. It's financial information only. Do your own research. Oh, and don't forget to follow us, subscribe, comment. I always look at the comments and try to comment back, and tell all your friends because you know you want to. And see you next week.